Hi, and welcome to Behind the Headlines on the South Radio Network. I'm Joe Quinn, and my co-host this week, as usual, are Neil Bradley,
Hi, everyone.
Harrison Keeley.
Hello.
This week, we are going to be running through the state of the world geopolitics style, I suppose you might call it, and the big things that have been happening that have happened over the past week. Some of them more obvious than others, but specifically, I suppose we're going to talk a little bit about North Korea and what's going on there and the prospects for that. And then we're also going to delve into the visit of French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Angela Merkel, both of whom visited Trump in very different styles, it has to be said. Macron was full on, get your finest silverware and Chinese crockery out. And Merkel was a kind of a bit of a flash in the pan, I suppose you might call it. A few hours.
I was
bit of a chat.
disappointed. I thought she'd at least get a twirl, a wink, and be called Angie or something. You
Yeah,
know?
none of that. No, I think she could put the abortion that. And Angela's not up for that kind of malarkey, whereas Macron just loves it. So anyway, yeah. So we'll be getting to that later on. So yeah, to start off, New Korea, it's all done. Peace is broken out all around the world. There's no more threat of nukes or nuclear war on the Korean Peninsula. Basically, remember? Does anybody remember? I suppose when you
Yeah.
kind of crap your pants so often, or people, not that we do necessarily, but when people are encouraged to crap their pants so often these days, it's probably hard to keep track of the things that you've crapped your pants about, in the past few months, in the past year or two, particularly in the past year, I suppose,
Yeah.
since Trump came in.
This very time last year, it was nuclear
that was
Armageddon
it.
was imminent.
Yeah, Trump was calling Kim Jong Un that fat kid and stuff.
Rocket Man,
Rocket Man. Somebody's calling him a fat kid, and then
McCain.
McCain called him that fat kid, and that's obviously that's what when you call someone names like that. Then the next thing is you push the red button, right? Everybody knows that, right? So and there were insults traded back towards Trump. I can't remember what they called Trump, but I'm sure it was. Pretty sure it was.
I think their
Dotard.
official statement.
Huh?
A dotard.
Dotard. There you go. That's
Dotard.
Dotard Trump. But that's all gone away now. As quick as it looked like it was going to happen, like we're all going to be wiped out in a nuclear holocaust, suddenly it's peace. Oh, how did that happen? That's amazing. Makes you wonder about the reality behind those that hystericization of the we're all going to die, World War III any minute now. But yes, so New Korea, I mean, North and South, possibly going to certainly they've signed agreements, I think, agreements of understanding to be nice to each other and to increase things like trade and open their borders a little bit more and not be so violent, and for North Koreans to stop building those deadly nukes that could wipe everybody out, particularly America, particularly California, because that's where they're going to be fired. And the ones that he test fired, well, they didn't get very far, a bit out into the sea. But anyway, it was nuclear Armageddon any moment. That was why Hawaii. If you remember Hawaii, somebody pushed the alert, the alert in Hawaii, the panic, incoming nukes. That was maybe as a result of that, I suppose. So that's the kind of level of nonsense that goes on, But anyway, back in the real world, of course, it's a good idea that North Korea and South Korea would cozy up a little bit more than they have been. They were artificially divided as a result of the Korean War, perpetrated effectively by America back in early 50s.
45, actually, right at the end of the war.
It was
the country was partitioned in 1945. Yeah.
But the Korean War was 1953.
The Korean War, sorry.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. When they blew the crap out of it, basically,
obliterated
about a third of the population, I think, and then drew that, and that, I suppose, that cemented the division, let's say, and certainly made North Korea, certainly from the North Koreans' point of view, certainly soured relationships with the West, let's say, um, after the West, i.e., America, killed 1/3 of their population. So yeah, that's
They became the hermit state.
right,
It's been 65 years. They never actually ended the war. Officially, it's an armistice. So
right.
that's why,
It's officially over.
nothing substantive really is going to come out of a first meeting. But they did seriously, they seem to be serious about formally ending the war,
Right.
peace treaty. Um, and they made all kinds of cozy statements. And it looked very personal. It did look heartwarming and
Yeah.
genuine
Right.
and all that. It's been a few months since January. Something happened in January, and next thing, the North Koreans were sending a delegation to
Hmm.
the Winter Olympic Games,
Right.
and that was a real icebreaker.
Hmm.
Um, but of course, there's a whole sequence of things that happened last year. You basically summed it up as nuclear Armageddon, hystericization.
Right.
What was going on there? I wonder if in real political terms, Korea, this has only been able to happen now because North Korea got nukes. They got the big stick, and
Right.
now we can talk peace.
Well, that's often what happens, or that's it hasn't happened that often, but in theory, that's the way any country um, who feels like they might be threatened by the Western order, what they would do is if they were big enough and had the potential, they would attempt to arm themselves up to and including obviously the ultimate arm is nuclear weapons, so that you can defend yourself. So that basically you can have a defense against the potential regime change. Let's say if you don't do the right thing as far as the West concerned. So certainly there's nothing that may have been the case, but um, I'm not. I think North Korea would have been a longer process before, certainly before it was able to acquire the capability to really threaten anybody with their. I mean, their main threat really in that situation was against South Korea
Hmm.
because it's right there basically, and certainly they could have done. That's what they would have done any and all of their damage, and potentially Japan. Basically, we're targeting Western interests effectively in South Korea. I mean, there's a lot of U.S. military personnel, U.S. military bases in South Korea and in Japan, and Japan's a close Western ally, so those are their targets. So the idea that they would ever pose a threat, would have posed a threat in any in the short term or even medium term is silly. To America, that they would have posed a threat to them is nonsense.
Lindsey McCain and the right in the states in general are seriously suggesting Trump deserves the Nobel Peace Prize for
Right.
this. To what extent I mean, is there a relationship there? Is Trump's tough talk a contributing factor, at least, to bringing this about?
Possibly, certainly he thinks so because he's basically taken just today. I think he, in talking about North Korea, he more or less took all the credit. I did it all basically. It's all me. Of course, he's going to say that, but um, his tough talk may have been useful. I mean, it seems to
Hmm.
work. The whole kind of uh, he's brought back the idea um of well, it's not. He's changed the idea of talk quietly and carry a big stick. He just talks loudly and doesn't really use the big stick, or thinks that loud talk and harsh talk is enough to get you there. You don't need to actually use your big stick, which makes a lot of sense. You know what I mean? Certainly in the sense of, or to the extent that a lot of countries around the world are aware of U.S. military capabilities. You don't really need to go and bomb people. You shouldn't have to. In theory, you should just be able to threaten. And then get some movement on something. So, but I think Trump's role in the North Korean settlement wasn't insignificant, but it wasn't as significant as he's saying it is. And certainly the Chinese had a big part to play because they have a long-standing relationship with North Korea and were able to provide assurances for North Korea, keep North Korea kind of happy, basically, because that's their neighbor, right? It's right next door. Like, I mean, if you're going to look for people to be on your side, you're going to really look for your big neighbors and people in the region close to you that are able to have direct impacts on you and can uh, provide, let's say, protection and that you do most trade with and all that kind of stuff. You're not really going to, you're not going to be too concerned about America. The only thing that people are really concerned about America is that they're going to bomb them, not that, because America isn't anywhere near North Korea.
Hmm.
Uh, so I think Trump's role in that respect was maybe making it clear that he actually wanted a peaceful settlement, that he wasn't, uh, I think here's the thing. It's been for a long time since this North Korea thing has been going on, as North Korea as part of the axis of evil. That goes back to 2003.
Yeah.
So you're talking about 15 years of this kind of enemy, North Korea as an enemy. And certainly it was useful over those years for the Bush and the Obama administrations to use the alleged threat from North Korea as a rogue state, could get nukes, all that kind of stuff, to ex- project their power, let's say their military power, their naval power, into the Pacific theater, as they call it, as a kind of block and warning, really to China, to have boots on the ground and ships on the sea around China, and you could always say, well, it's for North Korea, right? That's why we're here. Well, no, we're not really. Actually, we're here.
We're here because this is our lake,
right? And we want to hem in China. So you haven't had movement on this because previous American administrations were happy enough to keep North Korea as the bogeyman. They didn't want to push any peace overtures or actually help to create peace between the two countries, and downgrade North Korea from arch nemesis to just another country that should be reunited with the South, because it was useful as a bogeyman, as an enemy, as those crazy North Koreans are going to blow everybody up. We got to be over there to protect the world, protect the free world and stuff. So I'm allowing for the idea that Trump was a bit more decent and actually was gave the North Koreans some assurances, or went far enough to help with the process of peace, that it could actually manifest. Because if the US doesn't want peace with a country, well, I can just say I don't want peace. It'll keep imposing sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
It'll keep pissing them off. It'll keep antagonizing, etc. And I think Trump, his contribution was to simply, so it wasn't as much that what he did, but what he didn't do, in a certain sense.
Yeah.
He basically just pulled back from the established policy over the past 15 years of American policy towards North Korea, of antagonizing them and keeping them as an enemy.
But
and that was enough.
It didn't seem like that in the media, though.
Well, no, but yeah,
it seems like it's opposite. I understand. You're probably right in the key arena, the backroom deals and talking on the phone and who's talking with who. That's I can imagine that scenario playing out. And yet, what we were treated to in the media was very opposite. You know?
The way I've been seeing it, the role that Trump played was in a kind of art of the deal way of taking the escalation to the point that actual negotiations are then necessary, because he could, I think that if anything, his role was to precipitate this whole process that might have taken longer if he had not been so bombastic in his statements. Because what you basically had, the U.S., whoever was in power, had the option of just basically keeping the same level of, provocation and response, and like what's been going on for years. And in that case, everything just kind of stays the same, and nothing kind of progresses to nothing goes anywhere. Everything kind of stays at the same level. But what Trump essentially did was take it to an extreme level, and the media played a big role in that by hyping it up so much that people did, like you said, Joe, people did crap their pants thinking there was going to be nuclear war. When things get to that kind of level, that's when negotiations become more likely. And so I don't think Trump had, a huge role to play, like you're saying, but I think that he did play that kind of catalyst role in getting things moving, things that would have probably happened regardless, but maybe over a longer stretch of time. Because of course, Moon, the new South Korean president, part of his platform was, being reasonable. So,
right.
Yeah, that's the way I see it. It just kind of brought things to a head.
The Trump effect. I think it's there are two other agents here. I mean, the three newcomers arrived in the last. Well, one of them arrived in 2011, but we didn't really see or hear about him until obviously this blew up last year. That's Kim Jong-un himself.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is Moon Jae-in, the new president of South Korea since last year, after their previous government fell because of a major corruption scandal.
Right.
And then of course Trump. So the agents, the actors, also brought something new to this as well. And I want to say something about Kim Jong-un. Obviously, he's very young. I mean, people are raving about how precocious Macron is. Yeah, but his exact age isn't known, but he's probably about 35. Apparently, we listened to him an excerpt of his statement to the press after the summit before we came on air. Well, we couldn't tell. It's in Korean, of course, with subtitles. But apparently, Koreans listening to it are like, he's speaking Korean, but there's something funny about his voice. And I realized that he's got a kind of a heavy-ish Swiss German tinge on his accent, because he went to school probably in Switzerland
Right.
as a kid and as a teenager in France, I think.
Right.
So that's something new in the equation. This is a kid who's born after. He's the first leader of North Korea born after North Korea became such.
Mm-hmm.
He's internationally, probably speaks a foreign language or two.
Mm.
He's probably just the right element you need for the country to make the step and open up, you know?
Yeah.
In 2010, someone did try to sabotage, and they did, in fact, effectively. It's why it's been 8 years, 11 years since the last summit between the two countries. A missile or torpedo of unknown origin sunk a South Korean vessel. I know I wrote something on it at the time. I don't quite remember, but there was something mysterious about it. Obviously, North Korean submarine was blamed, but they provided some evidence to show that no, this wasn't us. So yeah, literally right there, you can have an actual false flag in the classic sense of the word, a naval attack pinned on the flag of another country. Yes, obviously false flags will be a constant threat in any hot conflict or potentially reheating conflict around the world. But I think more likely is that we'll probably see this drag on, because Korea as a whole, the situation there will remain a point of leverage between East and West. So it's not going to be, it's Korea will be solved, but in the context of other things, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's down the list really in terms of priorities for for Washington and the kind of deep state or whatever you want to call them. When you consider the stuff going on in the Middle East and the perennial threat from Russia that everybody knows about and is growing every day. If you listen to the Western press, they're up to everything basically. I mean, anything that goes wrong.
They're all up on the internets.
Frank on the chat room said that Joseph Farrell, whoever he is, name rings a bell, but Joseph Farrell suggested that the US used a rod from God to destroy the North Korean nuclear testing site and blew up a mountain.
Ah, right.
He said the Chinese confirmed an earthquake after the last test. I read the story about the possible earthquake and a mountain.
A portion of it
collapsing or something like that. But to ascribe that to
that had been known for many years, though, that it was on the verge of.
Yeah, to ascribe that to the US, it just sounds like somebody, probably John McCain, made that story up, trying to make America look as powerful as it isn't, or as you'd like it to be. Yeah. So yeah, I think we'll just have to wait and see. But it's good news. I don't think there's anything gonna go. I think North Korea is a kind of done deal at this point. Like you said, it'll take a while for things to be ironed out, and there'll probably be a few hiccups along the way. But I think it's too small and really insignificant at this point. And if both leaders, the real test in that now would be the North and South Korean leaders, Kim Jong Un and Moon, should be on the same page basically about any potential attempt to do that, and to
And to what extent can South Korea do that with? I mean, this intelligence agency is joined at the hip with certain Western agencies, so we'll see.
Yeah. So that's North Korea. Moving on to the visit of the two.
Le Grand Visite.
Le Grand Visite from
Napoleon.
Jupiter. What's his name? Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and Angela Merkel. Not together, of course, one after the other. Macron first, then Merkel, hot on his heels. A bit of a love-in with Macron and Trump. Kind of embarrassing the way they got it on.
Yeah.
And neither of them really knew what to do with each other, kind of thing. They didn't know whether to hug or kiss or just get a room or something. Somebody should have advised him not to do that, just to keep it formal, because you just look stupid. You make yourself look like a bit of an idiot, and he was grimacing at the shenanigans going on where, kind of shake hands and not sure, huggy, shake up, thump, pat on the back, holding your, I don't know, and then you look stupid, you know. And everybody's grimacing and squirming with you. And why do you do that? What's your problem? Just shake the goddamn. I mean, you know what Trump's like, you know. So just kind of like shake his hand, and if he wants to pull you in for something, just go, no thanks, whatever, you know. I mean, most other leaders had that down when shortly after Trump was in power. They were basically just, you know, you keep a stiff arm basically when you're shaking his hand, you know, so he doesn't pull you in, that kind of stuff, and you just let go, you know, and say thanks, that's done, and you move away. Macron was all up for it. Like he was like, let's hug, you know, let's embrace, kiss me, my beautiful friend, my beautiful American
He has a thing for the older people, you know.
overlord. He does, obviously. He has a thing for older people, so maybe
Well,
that's
but
part of it.
this was almost a repeat of the Macron Trudeau, you know, meeting, because that was in the news. Was it just the week before where Trudeau and Macron got together, and it was the same kind of touchy-feely, huggy, like bromance thing, as the media was calling it, which made me wonder if there's like a, you know, a tripartite agreement to appear all, you know, buddy and
Yeah.
you know, touchy-feely, because it's just I don't know, it's just weird.
I
It
think
kind of came out of nowhere.
Macron was at this from the get-go when he had Trump in Paris
Mm.
last year. It was first
For
noted
Bastille
there.
Day, yeah.
A lot of touchy
Yeah.
pats on the back. When it was thought there would be, you know, a really uncomfortable standoff between them, given that one is Mr. Rothschild, globalist, and the
Right.
other one is Merkel first.
Yeah.
That didn't happen at all. They
No.
both
Well,
hit it off.
for the cameras, you know, you gotta. And Trump Trump reportedly likes forming personal relationships with people. It's important to him to that he likes someone, and maybe Macron got wind of that, so he decided to, you know, load it up, you know, lay it on in spades, you know, show him that I really like you, Donald. I really, really like you. Give me another kiss, and then that would give him some leverage, I suppose, in doing what he wanted to do, and that's what we want to talk about. Really, is what Macron's aim was in going to the US, and probably the best way to deal with that, or to look into that, is to look at what Macron said, because he gave a speech to, this was part of the full package tour of America. He gave a speech to a joint session of Congress with the senators there and everybody who was anybody in Washington, even what do you call her, Nancy Pelosi, she was there, and so yeah, this is his speech part. We're just going to look at play a little bit of his speech to Congress. And this is after the fact. This was more or less the last thing he did. But before that, he had all of his private chats with Trump. But you can tell more or less what he talked about with Trump privately from what he said to Congress, you know, in broad terms. But we'll kind of dissect the political speak here for and we'll try and figure out what he's trying to say. So we'll stop and start this as we go, but have a listen.
The terrorist threat is even more dangerous when it is combined with the nuclear proliferation threat. We must therefore be stricter than ever with countries seeking to acquire the nuclear bomb. That is why France supports fully the United States in its efforts to bring Pyongyang through sanctions and negotiations towards denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Yay, whatever. Let me just pause it there. This is just before, obviously, this is a few days before the announcement of the North Korean meetup, so, you know, that's kind of old news in a certain sense.
Right.
But I thought it was interesting what he just said there, that the terrorist threat is much worse, or is more important to deal with the terrorist threat in the context of nuclear proliferation. And then he segued straight into North Korea. Ergo, North Korea is a terrorist state with potential for...
And liable to give dirty nukes to terrorists.
Or just use them themselves.
Which is the plot from Team America from 2002, that goofy satire movie.
Right, exactly. And then listen who he segues into next in that same context.
As for Iran, our objective is clear. Iran shall never possess any nuclear weapons.
Hang on a minute. Want to emphasize that for a second?
Not now, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, never.
A rousing standing ovation for that one. Never, jamais, in French. So, a bit arrogant, to say the least. Well, first of all, Iran's effectively a terrorist state. That was in the context of what he was talking about. The terrorists who have, he said, terrorist threat is very important, especially in the context of nuclear proliferation. North Korea and now Iran. Iran will never. Here's some jumped up little 40-year-old French guy, a banker, standing up in front of Congress, talking from a country with 60 million people, the president before his time of 60 million people, talking about a country in the Middle East, in Asia, effectively, with 80 million people, with a history goes back thousands of years before France even existed, and he's telling them that they will, what they will and will not get, never.
Right, and he's
is that exceptional stand right there? Is that like mandate of heaven, based, or not mandate of heaven, but
it's George
Manifest
Bush's
Destiny?
Axis of Evil from 2001.
Right.
That was the exact same line, which was handed to him, just as it's now being handed to. It's the party line.
They will never get it, never. So he gets a.
Which, by the way, one other point, he just contravened the very Iran deal he's in Washington to try and uphold, because the deal says Iran will have no nukes for 10 years.
Well, 10 years as a first, yeah. Yeah, there's nothing in the Iran deal.
Hang on a second. That wasn't the agreement.
Right, there's nothing in the Iran deal that says never, but he's appealing to Trump there, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's listen to what he says next. Blah, 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 pause, very good. Yes, sit down.
But this policy should never lead us to war in the Middle East.
Hesitant applause.
Did anybody notice the discrepancy there? This is call of Congress, all of the Senate, and some of them. No, obviously the few claps were from the
Democrats,
from the humanitarian Democrats, right? The so-called anti-war party. A few of them left in there, Democrats. Oh, muted applause. It should never lead to war in the Middle East. I'm not sure I'm on board. We kind of like war in the Middle East. You know what I mean? We have a kind of a history there, and it's fun, and it gets stuff done, and we like it, and we're America. So for you to stand up and say no more, I mean, really, no war in the Middle East? Yeah, I don't know about that. Yeah, let's carry on here.
We must ensure stability and respect sovereignty of the nations, including that one of Iran, which represents a great civilization. Let us not replicate past mistakes in the region. Let us not be naive on one side. Let us not create new wars ourselves on the other side.
Muted applause again. Let's respect Iranian sovereignty. Let's not create new wars. And you're going off script here, Macron. I'm not sure I could follow you on that one. Pathetic, like, really. I mean, it's just. I mean, right there is that's America. That's the American establishment, the elite, Washington elite. There, what they're into. Like, I mean, they just don't like anybody standing up and saying we shouldn't have any more war in the Middle East.
And there's an agenda to follow. Bolton says there'll be a new regime in Tehran in 2019. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, let's get into the meat of this.
There is an existing framework called the JCPOA to control the nuclear activity of Iran. We signed it at the initiative of the United States. We signed it both the United States and France. That is why we cannot say we should get rid of it like that.
All right.
Yeah. Little applause.
A little bit of applause there. Yeah, so he goes on basically about that. His point, Macron's point here is, when he went to Washington was, well, he had a few points he wanted to make. One was the Iran deal and trying to encourage or in some way coerce Trump not to back out of the Iran deal, which he is planning to do possibly on May 12th.
Yeah.
When it comes up again for whether or not to impose sanctions on Iran, or to extend the Iran deal, basically a U.S. agreement with the Iran deal. The reason France does not want Trump, America, to back out of the Iran deal is because when the Iran deal was signed in mid 2015, pretty much a bunch of French companies, in particular, but other European companies, German companies, but particularly French companies, were in the starting blocks. And as soon as that deal was signed, or probably even before it, they were straight into Iran. And by far, France has made the most investment and has most investments in Iran since sanctions were lifted, and officially Iran was back into the international community after really a decade or more, or decades you could almost say, of sanctions on and off.
I have a couple of small examples,
Right.
but they're massive in the scale that they're agreed upon. Iran awarded Airbus over Boeing huge deals for basically an entire new civilian fleet of aircraft. And on the energy side, Total Energy of France won the deal as part of a major consortium to develop Iran's gas field, the Paris gas field, the largest on earth.
Right.
So,
I think it's 5 billion. Total has a 5 billion deal to develop that gas field. And of course, Iran has a lot of gas, a lot of oil. Russian companies also got in there, and Chinese companies are also heavily invested in Iran, particularly since the sanctions were lifted. And America just not so much. So that's why Trump is feeling like, well, why should I stay with this deal, basically? And when he talks about renegotiating the deal and it was a very bad deal, what does he mean? Well, he keeps on. He's been going on for a year, for his whole term, or his whole presidency so far, talking about this Iran deal is so bad.
right.
And nobody ever explains, and the media reports, yeah, Trump says the Iran deal is bad and he wants to renegotiate it, and they never explain to you why.
Well, Trump himself never did.
And he never explains to anybody why.
He was raging against it when he was campaigning.
Right. He was saying it's a bad deal. It's all bad, very bad. Don't like it. And, I mean, talk about the media. Like, surely the media would be able to investigate.
Follow-up question.
Well,
why?
Or ask him or investigate a little bit and find out and bring their readers. But you look at any report on Iran deal, and all you hear is bad. It's bad. Trump wants to negotiate it. The reason, as we're saying here, is not just this reason, but one reason Trump is saying it's a bad deal is because America didn't get enough out of it. They didn't get access to enough of. Iran has massive kind of natural resources, and there's a lot of business to be done. There's 80 million people. It's the biggest kind of country in the region, and America just didn't get a big enough cut of the pie, and that's what he wants to renegotiate. At the same time, the U.S. Trump is, and every American president and the American establishment is under pressure from Israel, who does not want anybody doing any business with Iran at all, ever, never, jamais, right? That's Israel's perspective, and they put pressure on, helping put pressure on the US to basically just blow up Iran. If they could, they want to blow up Iran, not far from making a deal with them or even backing out of a deal. That's not what Israel wants. Israel wants Iran assigned the status of pariah state and just to be obliterated or sanctioned out of existence, basically, because that's their. Go ahead.
I have a question. It kind of predates all of it, but Macron mentioned it in his speech when he reminded Congress that you initiated this.
Yeah, he just said that.
Why? Why would the US have been initiating and supportive and eventually signed off on the JPCOA?
Right. Well, that's the other thing.
Back when? Well,
that's the other aspect of it is they were happy to sign this Iran deal in 2015. Because if you think back to mid-2015, what was happening, particularly in Syria, and this is where we gets into the geopolitical aspect of it. Syria in 2015 had been through basically 4 years of being overrun by literally hundreds of thousands of jihadis from other countries, and the Syrian government and the Syrian army were seriously hard pressed, and it was looking very likely at that point in mid-2015 that the Syrian government was going to fall, and the West was going to achieve, and with their Gulf states, Saudi, Israel, Qatar, UAE allies, what they had been trying to achieve since they started the quote-unquote Syrian civil war, was to basically get rid of Assad and install a client regime. And they thought that was about to happen, and it was about to happen militarily. But 3 months, less than 3 months, actually probably closer to 2 months after the Iran deal was officially signed,
July 2015.
Right, so July, August, September,
Right.
end of September, 1st of October, Russia kind of dramatically and unexpectedly announced itself on the scene in Syria, and over the next 2 years, and until today, 2.5 years, has totally reversed that whole situation, where Assad and the Syrian government have gone from strength to strength. And the most important part of that is that that has allowed Iranian influence to spread across the Middle East. And part of the goal originally of getting rid of the Syrian government and sending the jihadis in, the Western-backed terrorists in, was obviously it was in the US interests and Western European NATO allies' interests, let's say, because there was all sorts of gas deals and they could basically divide up the country. And they also had deals of gas lines from Qatar through, from the shared oil field between Qatar and Iran was going to pass through Syria. And Syria, several years before this, had said no. Before the start of the civil war, was one reason why they actually started. So they have an interest in it, but obviously Saudi Arabia does not like. It has had it out for Syria and the UAE, etc. But all as a means to getting Iran effectively, because there's this thing called, they keep referring to, all people refer to it as the Shia Crescent, goes from Lebanon into Syria, through Iraq and down into Iran. And it's basically they call it a Shia, as in Sunni Shia Crescent. And it's this Iranian, effectively, or so they call it, arc of influence.
Right.
And this is a deadly threat, or so they see, so they believe, to the Israelis and Saudi Arabia and the established order effectively in the Middle East. So the destruction of Syria, the planned destruction of Syria via the jihadis, was designed to basically contain and push back Iran. You were taking out the middle block in an arc, let's say, and making it your own, making it, that would be an enemy of, let's say, Lebanon and Hezbollah, an enemy of the Iranians and even potentially the Iraqis. So you were just destroying that kind of alliance effectively. And that was the plan of the Syrian civil war. And then it was overturned by Russia coming in and kicking out killing all the jihadis. So the Iran deal was agreed in mid 2015 on the belief that this was what was going to happen. Syria was going to fall. Syria was going to become a client state of the West and of Israel and of Saudi Arabia, and therefore Iran would be contained. Therefore, it was fine to open Iran up to the international community, to international commerce, to international business at that point, because it had effectively been geopolitically kind of neutered, let's say, or that's what they thought was imminent. And since then, that's all been completely turned around, and actually the opposite had happened. Iran has been emboldened, and this is why this is part of the reason now why they're talking about they want to do something about Iran, and why I think this is my assessment, is that when Trump talks about the Iranian deal is a bad deal and we need to renegotiate it. Yes, it's a bad deal because things have changed in the 2 years since you signed it very dramatically. You're not getting a good deal out of it economically. That's what Trump's interests are. But Israel is gunning, obviously, for Iran because of its extent, because of the Russian interference or Russian involvement in the Syrian civil war, quote unquote, and the expansion of Iranian influence, which is terrifying Israel. And Israel is putting pressure on Trump and on the American establishment to do something about Iran. First and foremost would be start sanctions, back out of the Iranian deal and impose sanctions on them. I mean, what's the first thing they do? The West does whenever they don't like a quote-unquote regime. Well, they start off with sanctions, right? So Israel and the kind of like, let's say the American imperialists or the ideologues, the ones that think that America should rule the world basically forever and definitely rule the Middle East, they're the ones who are pushing for something to be done about Iran, like just from an ideological perspective, let's say, and to protect Israel and to maintain the established order in the Middle East. So there's a few competing factions there in that sense. Trump is sticking to his mandate that he campaigned on and his campaign kind of promises and the mandate that he was given by the people who voted for him, which was to get a better economic deal for for the US.
And the Israelis and the deep state are more than happy to egg Trump on and say, yeah, definitely a terrible deal, trash it ASAP.
trash
But
that deal.
Trump's interest is he's seeing it as a bad deal for economic reasons.
For different reasons. And he's trying to play. I mean, it's a game when you've got these competing factions in politics like that in big countries. If you're smart enough, if you can survive, you're having to try and play, not them off against each other, but you're having to try and appease them to some extent and work your own plan in at the same time. And it can be a very complicated game, and it's a stupid game that you have to play at all. But so that's what's going on with the Iran deal. And the other aspect of Macron's visit was specifically economic, and deals with Trump's focus on kind of America first, American kind of economic isolationism in a certain sense, or certainly economic protectionism. Macron is not happy with that, and then this goes into Merkel as well. Trump is threatening in the next few days to possibly impose tariffs on aluminum and steel imports from Europe, European countries.
They've already been imposed, but
Right.
then he added exemptions for Europe,
Right.
which already run out on May 3rd.
Right.
And will he renew them?
So he's talking about not renewing them, and therefore tariffs would be imposed on European imports to the US. And the problem with this is that the US is running a kind of a trade surplus with the EU, i.e.
deficit from their perspective.
deficit from their perspective. The EU, the US buys a lot more of stuff from European countries, particularly France and Germany, the UK and stuff. And Trump wants to export more products. He wants to ginny up, let's say, or he wants to.
Well, he wants to bring jobs back.
He wants to
the
encourage
United States.
the US economy and
manufacturing,
encourage production and manufacturing jobs.
And
And
tariffs.
cars. He talks about cars, etc. He wants, the idea is that America's buying too many, German cars, let's say, and they're not exporting enough of the cars that they're making in America to Europe, and he wants to do something that is a bit more fair, let's say, and to reduce that deficit in trade. And so, I mean, the fact that he publicly states that, and the fact that he has stated that, and that was his mandate, and the fact that both Macron and Merkel are coming over to try and deal with this, and he's to deal with Trump maybe imposing tariffs, suggests that Trump is on the level about that, because they wouldn't be coming over on false pretenses. They are actually concerned. I mean, it is a thing, basically. He has imposed those tariffs, on aluminum and steel, and is threatening now to expand them. I mean, just today, actually, or yesterday, he was at a rally, a kind of rally in Chicago, I think.
In Michigan, yeah.
In Michigan, yeah. And he said he claims the European Union was formed to rip off the US. And he said, and here's what he said. He said, "Not anymore. We told them that yesterday. Actually, the exact same words. Not anymore. Those days are over." And he tells the people at the rally, "In the short term, you may have to take some problems. Long term, you're going to be so happy." When he says that, I mean, of course, Trump says things and then doesn't follow through on them. But if he follows through on this one, and if he does what it sounds like he's going to do, that suggests that he is going to impose tariffs, or he's going to remove the exemption for the EU on aluminum and steel, but also expand it to other, or make other demands. I mean, it's not that so much tariffs, but establish quotas, basically, where he says that you have to buy X number of American cars, or American X, or American Y, in return for us buying X number of that, basically. And that's more or less, it's the same as it's a kind of same as a trade war, basically, because it's hitting European in the way that it's established right now in terms of the trade that's ongoing right now. If he was to establish or impose those quotas, European companies would be hit economically.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much the same as imposing tariffs.
This all blends into one big discussion, whether it's Russia, Iran, North Korea, Germany, or France. Sanctions is just a harsher way of saying tariffs.
Right.
It all comes down to tariffs,
Yeah.
protectionism versus globalization, open markets, open borders, and so on. So far, it's only a small scale, but I think the Europeans know that this will be be a big change. Basically, I don't think there have been tariffs between Europe and the US for like 30 years. It took a long time to remove any.
Right.
Europe did very well out of it, especially Germany.
Right.
And now it's like they're coming back. For now, it would be a relatively symbolic gesture, but the symbolism is not lost on Merkel.
Right.
Who said in her statement with Trump to the press afterwards, we'll play it now.
Yes, Germany and Europe have to take their destiny into their own hands, because we can no longer, as we used to during the period of the Cold War, during the years when Germany was divided, rely on America coming and helping us. America is still helping us, but step by step, we will simply have to increase our contribution to, and America has been very much engaged, very broadly engaged in parts of the world that are far away from America. And the people of America, too, have said, well, what's in it for us? So the president is saying you ought to have some more burden sharing. So in a way, we're maturing. We're growing out of a role where after the Second World War, people were rather happy for Germany not becoming too engaged, not too active, because during the period of National Socialism, we created such incredible injustice in the world, and but this post-war period is at an end. It's more than this post-war period is well, that's essentially 70 years ago. So we as Germans have to learn to assume more responsibility.
Right. So that's Merkel basically saying that reading Trump, reading what the from her 3-hour discussion, that's all she had. No dinner, no nothing, no kissing, no hugging. Just the discussion. She got that from Trump, basically, that Trump's attitude is, you all got to look after yourselves now. Big Daddy America is going home. I'm too tired. I'm too old to look after you kids anymore. And you're all going to have to look after yourselves.
Out of the basement.
You're getting out of the basement. And this obviously coincides with the idea of a possible kind of trade war of some description, where we're not joined at the hip anymore. And we're going to have to, we're not going to.
Trade war is kind of the extreme result, right? And sanctions, that's all over there at the extreme. And in between, you have competition. As Trump sees it, it's about competition. And you are a competitor to us.
Right.
We need to stop pretending you're like
forget
my
about
child
the
in the basement. The special relationship. Okay, whatever. You're hurting us. So now you're going to pay.
And he's doing that for the American people, essentially.
Yeah.
Which, and of course, you never heard this. This is in his favor, basically. As bad a state as the world is in, and as messed up as it is, and as corrupt as politicians and everything are, this didn't happen under Bush or Obama or anything, and it was all ongoing, I mean, this kind of trade surplus and American companies being hurt by kind of the deficit running with the EU and stuff.
I have a theory that actually it did start. In the last few years of Obama's second administration, the US opened court cases against Germany's major manufacturers, specifically Volkswagen, and they hit them, and they fined, and they paid. Also, French banks. I think French banks were fined something like 10 billion. But anyway, Volkswagen was fined something astronomical, supposedly because they had failed to meet certain CO2 regulations, blah, blah, blah. It had the stench of trade war, of a way to punish your competitor, hurt your competitor, and then therefore help your own industries.
Right.
I think what all that's changed really is that Trump has come in and expressed it, articulated.
But that's a big change, though, for him to come out and say it and have leaders over and discuss it, and then it become official. Like, it's one thing if you accept that now and again you're going to hit back and you're going to feather your own pockets or do something for your economy, but then let it go back to the way it was,
Yeah.
And obviously that wasn't enough, for Trump anyway, to Volkswagen or hitting French banks and stuff. A one-off type thing wasn't enough. He wants a broad change in the way business is done between America and the EU. So, and that's pretty serious, So,
and Merkel correctly, objectively framed this in this proper historical context.
Right.
World War II, National socialism, yeah, we couldn't
Nazi-
really have
Nazi-
our own
Na-
foreign policy. We
Nazi guilt.
understand why, you know, we went under a wing, and that's coming to an end. It's been 70 years, been good, but yeah.
Yeah, there's no reason for it to end. But this is the problem here. So Merkel's saying that, but Macron is not happy about this at all. Macron is on the trade deal stuff as well, and like, you know, let's work something out. Let's not start a trade war. It's no good for anybody type thing. We'll work something out. But what, from the ideological perspective of the idea that Merkel just expressed there of America kind of isolating itself certainly from the way it has been up until now since the Second World War, she's accepting of that and accepting that we're going to have to become more independent. European countries and the EU are going to have to become more independent and chart their own course. Macron's not happy with that at all because he sees dire consequences, right, for the rest of the world. He sees it for the rest of the world in his language, but basically for the Western establishment, the Western order, let's say, because in his speech to Congress, and I'll just jump forward here and see what he's talking about somewhere around here maybe.
We will not let the rampaging work of extreme nationalism shake a world full of hopes for greater prosperity. It is a critical moment. If we do not act with urgency as a global community, I am convinced that the international institutions, including the United Nations and NATO, will no longer be able to exercise a mandate and stabilizing influence. We would then inevitably and severely undermine the liberal order we built after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
You see?
So he's talking about
same liberal order, World War II, but I don't want it to end.
Right. So he's
otherwise it's just anarchy and chaos.
Right. He's terrified that America, and and the reason he's saying that to Congress, right? He's saying it to America, i.e., America, you have responsibility here for not allow this to end. I.e., if you do what you're doing, if you Trump follow this course that Merkel seems to have accepted, then hell's going to break loose. You know, the whole Western liberal order that has made the world so wonderful since the Second World War, with America at the head, is going to fall apart. And let's just hear. I think this might be the part where he.
Powers with a stronger strategy and ambition will then fill the void we would leave empty.
Right. So the strongest powers, with ambition and whatever else, will fill the void. Who does he mean by the strongest powers?
Oh, Russia and China.
Right. Let's just hear a little bit more.
Other powers will not hesitate 1 second to advocate their own model to shape the 21st century world order. Personally, if you ask me, I do not share the fascination for new strong powers, the abandonment of freedom, and the illusion of nationalism.
So new strong powers, i.e. Russia and China, is the abandonment of freedom
and the illusion of
nationalism. And of course, Macron won his election against, primarily against Marine Le Pen, who's the nationalist, the Front National in France, you know, and he's super against any idea of nationalism. He's a diehard liberal humanitarian, you know, at least in his rhetoric, basically. Obviously, he's no problem with, you know.
There's someone who just expressed an inability to acknowledge reality. And for him, the rising nationalism, rising powers, it's not just Russia and China, it's obviously Iran.
In European countries
India,
as well.
Within Europe also. And obviously he just grossly insulted the American people as well, because they're precisely one of these new powers by being a national sovereign.
Right, the ones who voted for Trump, yeah.
He says, he lowers his voice. I'm not sure if everyone heard that, but he says, personally, I have no fascination with this extreme nationalism. As in, you get the sense of disgust. It's absolute disgust. And then he says he accuses them, people with the fascination, i.e. he probably referred to people like us, as being the ones suffering from an illusion. No, sir. This is reality imposing itself on your illusion.
Right. Let's just hear what else he says. Oh, he gets some applause. A standing ovation, no less.
Yay, globalism.
That's America in the lead.
Yeah.
Therefore, distinguished members of the Congress, let us push them aside, write our own history, and birth the future we want. We have to shape our common answers to the global threats that we are facing. The only option then is to strengthen our cooperation. We can build the 21st century world order based on a new breed of multilateralism, based on a more effective, accountable, and results-oriented multilateralism, a strong multilateralism. This requires, more than ever, the United States' involvement, as your role was decisive for creating and safeguarding today's free world. The United States is the one who invented this multilateralism. You are the one now who has to help to preserve and reinvent it.
Yay! Basically, what he's saying is he's complaining about NATO falling apart and the Western world order falling apart because of because of his discussions with Trump. Merkel had the same discussion, got the same answer, and it's basically Trump saying, "America first, you can all, bugger off, basically we're not best buddies anymore. Don't have a special relationship anymore. America has to be put first economically, as far as Trump's concerned." And Merkel went, "Oh, okay, well, whatever. I suppose you're right, whatever. But we're gonna do well." Merkel assumes responsibility to some extent, and that's because Merkel isn't quite as much of a kind of an Atlanticist as Macron is. Macron is like a Rothschild banker basically in his history, and he's only a young guy, and he's like he was birthed in some kind of vat in the basement or in the safe in a Rothschild's bank. He was produced with a mixture of neoliberal tears and humanitarian intervention with a dash of, I don't know,
George Soros DNA here.
George Soros DNA. That's who he is basically, and so he's an ideologue, with the Western. That's all he knows. That's what he's been brought up with. And Merkel's a lot older, longer in the tooth.
Born and raised in East Germany.
Still has never given up. To her credit, Merkel has resisted the strong and relentless pressure from the US and from some people in Europe to ditch Russian oil and gas supplies. There's this Nord Stream 2 that's still being planned, and there's still no sign, despite screaming and shouting in Congress about the threat from a new Russian pipeline coming into Germany, that she hasn't bowed down to that, and it's still going ahead. So she's more of a realist, let's say, which explains why she was more willing to accept what Trump was saying and say, okay, well, we can do it on our own then. Okay, no problem. If you want to change, we'll go with that, and we'll have to be more independent. Fine, we can do that. Macron just is like pooing his pants. He doesn't know what to do. No, the Western liberal order, it's collapsing. America, stay, please, I love you. What are we going to do with it? I mean, what are they going to do? What's NATO going to do without America?
Right.
Trump saw, if NATO is no longer basically a word for
the US Army,
the US military, with a few European countries, France, UK mainly, and Spain a little bit, sending a few planes to go along on the bombing runs type thing. How is Macron or his lackey, his people gonna decide to invade the next Libya and bomb the crap out of it without American military might? What if France wants to bomb some African country and invade it for its own reasons, and Trump's first response is, "What's in it for me?" That's nah, dude. You got it all wrong. It's not about It's not about economics.
It's about what's in it for us.
It's about It's about what's in it for us, and it's about the ideology. It's about the white man's burden. You know, it's what we've done forever. You know, so get with the program. And Trump's like, nah,
Show me the money.
I'm a businessman. You know. So yeah,
That's one of the it's not ironic, but irony isn't the word. This is why Trump's likable, right? So let me put it in the worst terms, right? First, he's a greedy, arrogant, selfish, typical kind of American businessman.
right.
But in being so, in being looking out for number one kind of thing, he's actually what the whole economic theory of the West is based
It's about
on.
yeah.
The rational actor who rationally thinks is, well,
Right.
what's in it for me? If I do well out of it, okay, excellent. And the rational theory goes on to expound, well, if everyone acts in a rational manner,
hmm
it improves the collective good for all, because Trump, in being so, will inadvertently, indirectly, lift a lot of other people
Right.
with him
Right.
by acting out for number one.
Right.
And it's a kind of a weird quirk of Westernism that is founded on that theoretical basis. And Macron would himself be very well schooled in it, being having gone to the
Banker.
best schools, banker, Rothschild, and so on. And yet there's this kind of twist in the twist in the theory there, where
I think it's
yes, you be rational, but you also answer to a higher power that's unspoken or something.
It's
there's some-
Macron. The difference is Macron's liberal bent. You know, it's like the difference between conservative and liberals. You know, we talked about this in previous shows. You know, and I mean that in the kind of in the purest meaning of the word, or in the least political meaning of those two words, of a kind of mindset, a conservative mindset versus a lefty liberal mindset. And Macron's definitely lefty liberal, and they're all about that. They have this added element of the of kind of like the white man's burden of humanitarian interventions, of doing it for the good of the poor children and stuff, because that's their makeup, you know, and that's his makeup, you know, and he wants to keep that on board, the ability to go around the world and remake the world. Like he said it just in the speech that we just listened to. He just said it. He said about making the 21st century world order the way we want it to be. And he means he said 21st century world order. And Trump's like, I'm American. I'm a businessman in America, and I'm tasked with helping the American people. What part of going around the world and engaging in endless conflicts and quagmires and getting bogged down and spending billions of dollars in the military and wasting it, what part of that is included in helping the American economy or helping create jobs in America? He's like, it doesn't. And Macron's like, but the babies, the black babies, you know, the poor people, the suffering people, the dictators, you know, the oppressed, and me leading the charge to save the world. What about that? Group of guys, you know, from the deep state or something, come and try and talk to Trump and say, give him the vision, the ideological vision of, you know, America, manifest destiny, exceptional nation, you know, rulers of the world, policemen of the world, keeper of the chalice of freedom and democracy, blah blah blah, including bombing the crap out of everybody. And his first response is to get his calculator out. They're gonna go like, dude.
So this is going to cost how much? Right. Okay. That's the cost. And the benefits? Well, we're working on that. We foresee that in 20 years we might, hang on, no, what are the benefits now? I want to see the benefits outweigh the cost.
That's it.
On my desk this morning.
It's a division between visions, you know, completely pretty radically different visions of the world, and that's why you've had all these attacks against Trump. That's why from before he was even president, he was the knives were out for him, you know,
right?
Because people understood that that's who he was and that's what he's going to do, and their problem was that he wasn't on board with the ideology, you know. And America isn't just about making money, you know, from war. Yeah, war is a racket, you know, and you make money from wars, but that's not why these people wage wars. It's far more pernicious in the sense that they're possessed with this ideology of we rule the world, we save the world by bombing it and making it in our own image. It's pathological, and that's the people who run the deep state. And Trump.
What was that quote from Michael Ledeen you found the other day?
Yeah,
from 20 years ago.
Neocon. Yeah, he said, you know,
American foreign policy.
Every 10 years, America needs to grab some shady little country and throw it up against the wall just to show everybody who's boss.
Right.
That's a bully. That's just someone who's a bully for the love of being a bully. Who likes the dominance and the control and turning the screws on people just for the pure pleasure of turning the screws on. And that's the kind of people they're dealing with in the so-called deep state, and particularly in British politics as well, within the quote-unquote deep state of British politics. That's what they're all about. And it's a throwback to, these people were infected genetically, I suppose, way back when, with some kind of imperialist mindset. It just got into them, and that's the way they see the world. I don't know if that's what happened, but it's, it is fundamentally a racist. That's why there's some, I can understand the leftist kind of like screaming and ranting over the past few years about racism, but they've got it totally wrong. Trump isn't a racist, the people who launched and pursued the war on terror after 9/11, they're the ones who killed 2 million Iraqis,
right,
and tens of thousands of Afghanis, and tens of thousands of Libyans, all of them because they were brown-skinned people.
Right.
And that's Obama. If you want to find a racist in the past 10 years in American politics up until today, look at Trump. Look at Obama, droning the crap out of small brown babies. He's the racist.
right.
Those lefties just have it totally wrong. And it's understandable, people taking appearance over substance,
Yeah.
and unable to actually think it through and see behind the scenes, read behind the headlines, let's say.
Exactly.
It's sad,
Alan mentioned Israel, the wild card. There was another big meeting this week. Israeli Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman,
Yeah.
the pit bull, was in Washington, and he met with Defense Secretary Mattis. That guy, he's got the nickname Mad Dog, which everyone clutched their pearls when he was nominated, but he's actually turning out to be a sound,
Fairly level-headed
guy.
Mm-hmm.
The Israelis also, Lieberman, before he went to DC to meet Mattis, announced that whether or not Syria gets the Russian S-300 system, we have the right to defend ourselves from the Iranians in Syria. Work your head out, try and work that out. But the key point here is the Mattis came away from that meeting and then spoke at some committee in Congress and said that I think he was he asked about, I think he volunteered it. He volunteered that he's worried that some kind of direct conflict between Israel and Iran is looking likely.
Well, the Brookings Institute put out a paper or an article just a few days ago saying that war between Iran and Israel is it's a matter of when, not if. But that's kind of nonsense. You have to look behind all this stuff as well, because we were talking about this earlier, and there's unlikely to be any kind of a major conflict in the Middle East now, particularly over the past 2 years since Russia has changed the whole dynamic there, and China is heavily involved in the Middle East and many other places around the world, and Iran has been emboldened and encouraged, and Syria is still intact and going from strength to strength and stuff. Who's going to fight? Under Trump, there's not going to be any war in the Middle East. Nobody's going to bomb Iran under Trump. Israel, of course, is a small Dakota French politician, shitty little country, and it is very small, with very few people, relatively speaking. But it can act on its own in a certain sense, but it's unlikely to act without some assurance from the US. But the Israelis are kind of a bit crazy. They're kind of pathological in a certain sense, because they're paranoid, and their whole ideology and worldview is based on the idea of them being victims, and everybody's out to get them. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of the politicians, certainly a lot of the people and a lot of the politicians, actually believe that, really, truly believe that. So it's at the level of pathology. They're not just bullshitting. So they could, in theory, act, but the Israelis have a history, particularly the Israeli intelligence, of doing things by way of deception. So what's most likely, in my estimation, if something is going to happen, you would have some kind of an attempt to make it look like Iran had attacked Israel.
Right.
Israel wouldn't necessarily respond to Iran, because that would ignite a war, big war in the Middle East, where everybody gets destroyed. And the last people who are going to want to get involved in a direct shooting war with Iran is obviously Israel, but also Saudi Arabia and UAE, and Qatar, because they'd be wiped out in no time, right?
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia is
They're so
big.
weak.
Saudi Arabia is a big enough country, but it's mostly desert, you know. They had a few cities in Saudi Arabia and it's gone, you know. And
Yeah.
especially hit their oil terminals and their oil ports, it's over, you know. And Iran has a capability to do that. It's just across the water in the Persian Gulf from the UAE and from Saudi Arabia, you know.
Yeah.
And Israel is within reach as well, easy reach as well. So that's not going to happen because they'll all be destroyed. I don't think any of them are that crazy, but they'll talk it up, and that's the whole point. That's how they try to get leverage over each other, is
Talk up such deadly scenarios.
right, or actually create a situation. For example, imagine there's a situation where a missile, decent-sized missile, is fired, because everybody's talked about Iran being all over Syria now, having bases. Israel attacked a so-called Iranian base, T4 base in Syria, according to the Israelis. The Iranians are all over Syria.
With 80,000 fighters.
80,000 fighters and crap loads of weapons coming in. So maybe a missile might fly from Israel or from Syria into Israel and hit somewhere in Israel. Israel wouldn't respond, but it would immediately blame Iran, and the international community would blame Iran, and that would be leverage. Where Israel wouldn't necessarily respond, there'd be a heated or very tense few days. Oh, there'd be another, oh my God, everybody crap the pants, World War III is about to break out, but it won't. And Israel they would do that in order to use international public opinion of Iran just attacked the Jews. What is this? Are you Hitler? Is this Holocaust 2.0? What's going on? We're the victims. Is it never again happening again? Oh my God. And the whole world have been programmed the past 70 years with the idea that Jews are victims and everybody's out to get them, and Holocaust could happen again and Hitler could rise up. Oh, well, look, there's one right there. Everybody in the world would be behind it, and that power of public opinion and exerted, and there'd be very few countries would be able to turn around and say, of course, Russia and Iran would say, we didn't do it, whatever, but then there'd be all this wrangling and stuff. But it would serve to put pressure on Iran. And that's the way they would seek to pressure Iran, because they know at this point that there's not going to be any hot shooting war in the Middle East, because everybody dies, basically. Right. I don't mean everybody actually dies, but nobody wins. There's no winner. Yeah. There's only who suffered slightly less than the others. So nobody wins. So that's the, and as far as I can see, their only option really in terms of the Israeli option, the pathological Israeli option of like Iran must be stopped at all costs. The only way that they really are able to stop Iran at this point would be to do something like that to leverage public opinion. And you notice, the reason I say that is because that seems to be the way things have gone over the past 5, 6, maybe 10 years or whatever in geopolitics. And you look specifically at Russia, at the way the West has tried to deal with Russia. There has been no World War III. There's been no shooting war. What they have
dealt with Ukraine by having MH17.
Right, that kind of thing. It's been this ridiculously intense propaganda war where Russia is accused of doing something, and there's staged events, and Russia is accused of doing the worst possible thing. The people are sitting in rooms thinking, what's the worst possible thing Russia could possibly do? Give me a list of 10 things, please. And then we'll pick one of them. Try and
blow a plane out of the sky.
Yeah, blow a plane out, poison some ex-Russian spy, that kind of thing. Make those things happen, and then use international public opinion to attack Russia or whatever, and that could be applied to any other country, where you propaganda-wise attack them viciously, and you actually achieve. You have the potential for achieving quite a lot through those means. At least, but really what it does is really only puts off...
It checks your opponent.
It checks your opponent, but it really only puts off the inevitable, because that kind of tactic is the tactic of someone who's losing, who's on the back foot, is on the way out, basically. And it's a last desperate attempt, because it is fairly desperate. I mean, it's a clear sign, to use Obama's allegation against Putin. It's a clear sign of weakness. Right. It's an example of weakness to do something like that, because it means that you cannot actually attack your enemy and destroy or defeat your enemy directly, and you have to use some kind of, what are they called, dirty tricks, basically, some dirty asymmetric propaganda information war to try and attack them and get everybody against them, make everybody hate them. And that's, well, why are you doing that? Why would you even do that? You're afraid of something. There's something about that person you're attacking that really troubles you, right? It seems maybe do you feel like you're going to lose to that person? Are you going to lose to them? Is that why you're doing this? And do you think that this will actually achieve a kind of turnaround in that situation? Probably not. It just delays the inevitable. Because by your own action, you're actually stating that there's some inevitable change coming, and you're desperately trying to resist it and stop it from happening. So effectively, you're fighting against reality.
Yeah.
There's a new reality that has emerged as a result of technological progress and the development of the world, basically. And you just can't bring yourself up to speed, basically. You can't let go of the old ways where you were top of the heap and come down to a new kind of multipolar kind of world conception of the world or world order. And so what do? Well, you just fight against it. But that's not made by anybody. It's not Russia doing that. It's not China doing that. That's just a natural function of the development of the world. And you're going to fight against that because you're not really. What are you fighting against? You're fighting against nature, reality, and you think you're going to win. And that's why in this fight against what is effectively a fight, these Western powers, Israel, the US, not so much the US, but deep state in the US, the Brits, fight in their fight against reality. They're actually having to make shit up. They're actually having to, and they're increasingly appearing like they are making shit up. And that's a hallmark of someone who is fighting against reality, when they fly into delusions, basically, and they look like they're actually delusional. They start saying stuff like Russia, stole Russia ate my dinner, or if something goes wrong,
Or I am the equal of Putin.
That kind of stuff, yeah. I mean, when you start blaming, like as the Brits in particular have done, and the Americans, like, Russia stole my election. Russia made sure Russia stopped Hillary Clinton winning the election. With what? With 2 tweets. That's your argument, and you're actually saying that? You're so far removed from reality that you're actually going to make that argument and think that people will believe it. Some people might, because they're as crazy as you. But you know what? The vast majority of people are just going to respond and go, "You're fucking nuts.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with you." And then, when you get that response from people, you realize that your nonsense isn't flying with them. What do? Well, a normal person would say, "Okay, better stop that." A crazy person doubles down on it and just says, "You don't believe that Russia stole the election? Well, they also stole other elections as well, and what else do they do? Come on, does nobody have any examples?"
They rigged the World Cup.
They're rigging the World Cup.
Well, they haven't
They're
happened
into
yet, but
doping.
they will.
They're up to everything, basically. You know what I mean? Anything that you can think of that they could possibly do, they're doing. And you have no evidence for it. You make those statements, people go, "You're still nuts. In fact, you're more nuts than you were before." So that's a hallmark of people fighting against reality, basically. And the people that you're attacking, the Russians, for example, that they're attacking, just sit back and go, "Wow." Well, you don't have to do anything. You just go, "Wow."
You just let it.
You just feel sorry for them. It's not going to end well for Israel, one way or another. I think if they persist in this, and there's no reason to think that they won't, because I think they've been pathologized, basically. I think the creation of the state of Israel was really based on was just a very bad idea. It was based on a kind of a paranoia or a pathology in a certain sense, and it's only entrenched itself and become worse over the past 70 years. So and it's a very small country. It's crazy. I mean, such a small country to be rabble rousing and engaging in those kind of dirty tricks, and the way they're treating the Palestinians. Obviously, did you notice there were floods there? It was weird. Just a few days after the whole the Duma thing and the Damascus thing, about a week or so. It was a few days ago.
Yeah.
There were torrential rains across the whole region, basically, in Israel and in Damascus, I think, and in other parts of Syria and Lebanon. But there were actually 9 or 10, I think, Israeli kind of hiker students, military recruits. Actually, they were in pre-military school or something. They were near the Red Sea in some canyon, and there were just flash floods because of the torrential downpours. And 9 or 10 of them were killed. But it also that torrential downpour also washed away part of the border fence between Israel and the West Bank.
Right.
It knocked it down, and that was just after, probably it was like a day or two after, or even the same day of when there was a renewed 3 more Palestinians were shot when they were in Gaza, when they were approached the border fence, whatever. Basically, Israelis are just murdering Palestinians.
Over 40 dead now.
Yeah.
That's pretty symbolic. Part of that impenetrable concrete barrier washed away.
Right. Well, it kind of gets to the point. I mean, I know we're going out on a limb here in a certain sense, but I just said that these people are fighting against reality. And, what is it they're fighting against when there's a new world order, a natural world order asserting itself as a result of just technological development and the development of the global economies and stuff, new countries coming online and stuff. Well, if you fight against that and claim that that cannot happen, you're fighting against nature effectively. And here we have an example of nature, washing away part of the Israeli border fence after the Israeli soldiers have been killing a bunch of Palestinians for approaching it. Anyway, it's interesting from a symbolic point of view.
One last major international meeting that took place last week that got zero attention in the Western media was the meeting of the leader of China and India.
Right.
Well, they were actually part of the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization meetings, but nothing no particular development came out of it. India remains a bit quite ambivalent about China's New Silk Road project, the Belt and Road Initiative. So it still won't sign up to it, but they might have that same old antagonism that specifically concerns Pakistan and how it's to be used, because some of China's development there in Pakistan runs to Kashmir, which is disputed territory with India. But at the same time, there are plenty of other deals, mega deals going on, a major new connection from India via Iran all the way to Russia. I mean, that's like epic. That's just a sort of infrastructure concept on a scale that's, it's like linking Canada and Brazil. I mean, this is the kind of epic developments that are taking place quietly. Now, they have their own PR. They would like everyone to listen. They do propagandize a bit. I mean, they want the world to know about these things, but it's drowned out by all these relatively small, minor things that are
World War III,
trying to let go of the illusions of the past.
Screaming and shouting, starting fires in different places. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the Macron thing. So Macron, in that speech, we didn't play it, but later on in that speech, he basically says explicitly, France will not back out of the Iran deal. He said that explicitly, and that's in response to, that's after talking with Trump, and Trump saying, I might back out of it, and France saying, well, I won't. But that was signed by several nations, Russia, China, France, the US, Germany. That deal was signed by them, so you potentially have the US backing out on May 12th, dropping it, and effectively imposing US sanctions on it. And up until now, when the US has imposed sanctions, its allies have gone along with it. But Macron is basically saying here that if the US backs out of the Iran deal and imposes sanctions on Iran, France will not follow suit. And probably Germany and other European nations won't follow suit either, i.e. they'll continue to do business with Iran. And they've even they've even set that up in a certain sense, because the sanctions that were previously imposed in Iran, European companies actually worked it in such a way that that they could continue to do deals with Iran. They set up basically kind of denomination, or the trade that they did with Iran was being done in euros basically, so that we could avoid the US dollar. So it's already in place for European companies, and particularly French companies, to continue to be able to deal with Iran without being sanctioned, because that's the threat. Obviously, is if the US backs out of the Iran deal and European countries don't, and they continue to do business, then the US, Trump, would be faced with having to say, well, you're in violation of the sanctions that I, America, imposed on Iran. And France would be like, well, I didn't agree with that. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm America. You have to agree. And France is like, no, I'm just going to keep doing business with them in dollars. So that's more of
euros.
In euros. So that would just simply increase the kind of parting of the ways effectively that happens. And I think that is going to happen in one form or another. There is going to be a parting of the ways between Europe and the US. And it's effectively a necessary parting of the ways for the future that's beckoning, basically, you know what I mean? Even in the context of like Eurasian integration and that kind of stuff, because if Trump can't, and he can't, he's only one president, right? I mean, the US is still controlled by the deep state effectively. And when Trump is gone, they will reassert themselves. So if the US is in the grip of the deep state and always will be, well then ultimately they'll have to go it alone, basically, with their vision of the world, which is that we're on top and everybody else must be subservient, and the rest of the world will just say, well, we'll leave you to your delusion and we'll just carry on. And there'll be a lot of slips, I'd say, in between now and then, that actually manifesting itself fully, but because there's certainly Atlanticists in Europe as well, and deep state elements within Europe that are pretty much the same as those in the US, particularly in the UK. But I think that's where it's going. The whole idea, the concept that has been talked about, and we've talked about, and other people have talked about, geopolitical analysts have talked about in terms of Eurasian integration. That's a reality. That's nature. That is going to happen at some point. And there's nothing America can do about it except stall it. And hopefully they won't go to the point of, if I can't have it, no one can. And I'm going to burn it all down or something. But certainly they'll start fires here and there. This is the deep state, to try and stop that from happening, or to push it off, to delay the inevitable, essentially, and just create more misery and suffering for people, But that's where it's going, So the other thing that I wanted to mention was today the Sunday Times doubled down, like I mentioned earlier, when you're fighting with reality and people don't believe you, you double down on your BS, thinking that I just didn't lie to them hard enough last time. I'll have to lie to them more egregiously this time, and then they'll get it. No, that's just going to make it worse. So the Sunday Times had an article, front page today, saying that Russia exposed. Russia tried to swing election for Corbyn. This is the Labour Party leader. In the elections last year, in the UK general elections last year, the Rupert Murdoch owned Sunday Times, the snobby paper of repute, supposedly,
for the UK,
has just I mean, they just came out with this and they just got trashed on Twitter when they put it on Twitter, and they just got so trashed by it, because this is just on the back of all of this other unbelievable stuff that is claimed that Russia did against the UK, from the Skripal thing to Duma, and the supposed chemical attacks and stuff, and people just aren't believing it, and a lot of people aren't believing it. So the Sunday Times, in their wisdom, decide that let's just do more of the same. Basically, let's throw out another hilariously implausible claim about what Russia hacked our election. Like, it's even just copying America,
Yeah.
America's the Clintonistas and stuff have been screaming about, Putin robbed us, robbed the Democrats, robbed Hillary of the presidential win, and a year and a half later, the Sunday Times is saying, "Oh yeah, Russia did that last year. Russia did that last year here as well," like as if like an afterthought type thing,
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to say that. Is the thing that people know that that's probably what you're going to say, so you don't need to say it really. We know you would say that. We know you'd say Russia did pretty much everything that you don't like. Whatever I don't like, Russia did. Is there an answer? And that's how simplistic it is. There's a lot of people who are going like, that was actually written on Twitter, I think, by one person.
Right.
That's the kind of British establishment's kind of go-to answer for everything. Whatever we don't like, Russia did it.
Yeah.
And
well, a couple of people replied to the Sunday Times tweet about tomorrow's headline, expose.
Yeah.
And they found, or maybe they had it themselves, a copy. They took a photo of a 1991 expose about Neil Kinnock, who was then
Labour
Party leader, exposed Kremlin connection to Kinnock.
Right.
And then somebody else went one above him and found an article from 1921.
Right.
Sunday Times exposed Kremlin or Russian connection, Red's connection to Ramsay MacDonald, who was Labour leader
Party in 1921. Right.
Right.
Yeah, people are getting wise to it, but and that's not necessarily their credit, because it's so in your face at this point that you'd hope that everybody would have understood what's really going on. The propaganda, the lies, and the Russia ate my homework kind of thing is so crass at this point that you'd think everybody with half a brain cell working would go, that doesn't sound plausible to me. It sounds like you're blaming Russia for everything. You sound a bit crazy. Maybe you should stop doing that. And then they go, no, Russia's making you think that. That's what's actually, they've more or less said that. They've gone to that extreme of actually saying that the people who don't agree with the British government, that actually Russia is more or less making them think that by by influencing them on Twitter and social media, and then those people in the UK who don't agree with the British government, with the British establishment, effectively, that they've been influenced by Russia. I mean, there's no response to that. That's just pure pathology, you know, where the person making those accusations, i.e. the British establishment, can never be wrong. They can never be challenged to say, listen, I think you're going a bit far with this. I think you're making accusations. Maybe, I mean, give them some credit, give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they're just a bit misinformed or they're a bit hystericized, and you try and appeal to them and say, listen, I think you're going a bit far with this Russian accusation thing. Russia didn't do everything. Russia can't be responsible for everything that goes wrong. And then their response is, that's exactly what Putin would say. Well, then you just have to walk away. You're talking to a crazy person. You're talking to crazy, crazy people, and you have to walk away from them.
In the environment the West has created, it has a mechanism for dealing with this, which is parliamentary democracy. People would vote in rational actors. However, when you're dealing with irrationality, they start rigging things for a while, which we've been in that period for, say, a couple of decades, and probably very egregiously.
It's kind of strange because you can call them crazy people, which they are, obviously. They've lost the plot, they've lost their minds, they've lost their grip on reality. But they're still very cunning. It's not like a normal crazy person, because when you posit it in that way, you think that they're gibbering idiots and they wouldn't be able to run the country in any meaningful way at all. Everything would fall apart, and they would start exposing themselves, and everybody would see it. But it's a level of insanity that's, you know, it's kind of below the surface or something, or at least there's people behind the scenes who aren't that insane. You know, there are people the ideologues who really believe, they're the really stupid ones who really actually, the ones who write the headlines and write the articles about anti-Russian stuff, they actually believe it. But then there are others who know that it's basically asymmetric warfare, that they're doing this on purpose. They're not crazy. They're the cunning kind of backroom boys who are, you know, manipulating events from behind the scenes type of thing, and they're the ones that are the real problem. Like, you can't just say that they're all crazy, and therefore if everybody's crazy, if these people are just lost the plot, and that eventually it'll all come tumbling down, right? Because that can't stand. A crazy house can't stand, right? But I think it's worse. It's worse than that. We're seeing the public face of it, which is the crazy aspect, where these people actually have lost the plot. They really believe their own bullshit. But there's other behind the scene who are rubbing their hands together in glee because it's working. Although I think they're probably a bit disturbed as well, because they're seeing that it's not working effectively. You know, because obviously when they put this propaganda out there, this anti-Russia propaganda, asymmetric information war, they hope that it will succeed. And what they mean by succeeding, or what I mean by succeeding, is that it will convince the great unwashed public that Russia really is evil and you should have nothing to do with them. And they've had some success in that respect, but not so much for a lot of people.
They'll do increasingly totalitarian things,
right?
Clearly, censorship,
right?
Taking over social media,
right?
Shadow banning, all kinds of subterfuge,
which ultimately means that it won't really be about Russia. It's about controlling the population. That's the real target, because that's the real enemy in a certain sense. Because if you want to convince someone, you desperately want to convince someone of a certain narrative, convince the whole population of a country of a certain narrative, and you spin stories and tell lies and make stuff up, stage events to convince them that, say, Russia or another foreign country is evil. That's on the geopolitical level. You want to achieve something by attacking that country, but you realize that the real cause of your problem is the free minds, let's say, of the population of your country. That's your real target ultimately, no? Because if you don't have them on side, then no amount of attacks against your enemy will ever work. You know, you first have to get the population thinking the right, quote unquote, right way, and then you can use that political capital, let's say, to implement policies. But if you don't have the people, if the people start disbelieving, so ultimately your anger or your frustration will be turned against them. And like you said, you would start basically just saying, well, we need to impose some kind of totalitarian controls for it. It's kind of like humanitarian, bomb people to save them. This would be like impose censorship against the British or the American population to save them, to protect them from the enemy. But what you really want is, what happens as an end result of that? You basically have, your goal is to have a whole population of slaves enthralled to you. So is that was your end, that was really your goal in the first place, right? Because that's what you've ended up with. On a final note on more or less sums up what we're talking about. There's an article in the it was provided by Red Fox in the chat room, article from a couple of days ago in the Telegraph, UK Telegraph, that saying that Britain is ranked in the list of countries that of levels of press freedom. List of countries enjoying the highest levels of press freedom. The UK is ranked number 40, and apparently the British press is shocked that they're full of shit and that it's official. Well, we've been trying to tell you for a long time, guys, that that you're full of shit. But okay, maybe you'll understand it now if there's an official press freedom ranking for you. All right, folks, we're going to leave it there for this week. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for our chatters. We'll be back next week with another show. So until then, we hope you have a good and pleasant evening.
See you all next week.